The best time spent with the people who truly matter. That single sentence turned one day of my life from a celebration into a curse. When those cursed words were spoken, I still knew nothing. I was wrapped in what was supposed to be the most beautiful attire of my life, a pure white dress. The mermaid line gown shimmered as delicate beads caught the light. Through the veil, I could see the view outside the window, a clear blue sky and soft greenery swaying in the breeze. Today, I, Harper Collins, was supposed to forget my practical title as an accountant for a while and become the heroine of a story. The venue was a hidden guest house nestled in the woods, a little distance from the city center. Next to me, the groom, Dylan, smiled with a slightly nervous expression. Even his parents, perhaps more than their own son, were concerned about me, saying repeatedly, "You look absolutely beautiful, Harper." But the seats that should have been occupied by the most important people, my mother, Vivian, and my sister, Riley, remained eerily empty, like holes torn open in the air. The ceremony was already past its scheduled start time. In the corner of the hall, I could see staff members whispering to one another. Their sympathetic glances pierced my back. "I'll try calling them again," Dylan said, standing up from his seat. All I could do was nod weakly. The light spreading beyond the aisle was now so dazzling that I couldn't look straight at it. Dylan returned from the waiting room and quietly shook his head. That gesture alone told me everything. No connection. The phone didn't even ring, no matter how many times we tried. "I see," I murmured, pretending to stay calm as I turned my gaze toward the window. But inside, I could feel the small thorn of unease, the one I'd been ignoring, spreading like poison through my chest. A surprise, an accident, or to drive away the worst possibilities, I reached for my smartphone. Anything was fine. I just wanted some sign that they were safe. And then it happened. A message popped up in my high school friends group chat. "Hey, aren't these Harper's mom and sister?" Attached to it was a single screenshot. My fingers stiffened and trembled, as if they no longer belonged to me. I held my breath and tapped the image. The enlarged photo showed familiar faces smiling brightly. The location, the penthouse suite of a 5-star hotel, said to be the hardest place to book in the entire city. In the center stood my mother, Vivian, dressed in a champagne gold gown. Beside her, my sister, Riley, held up a designer handbag as if to show it off. My aunt and cousins were there too. And beneath the photo, in a mercilessly cheerful font, were the same words. "The best time spent with the people who truly matter." Time froze. A numbness spread through my head, and a high-pitched ringing filled my ears. What was this? On my wedding day of all days? Understanding overtook emotion, leaving only the raw fact burned into my mind. No one in that picture cared about me. In their world, I had never existed. The phone nearly slipped from my trembling hand. My reflection on the screen was pale, my eyes unfocused. I don't know how long I stayed like that. When Dylan looked into my face with concern and shook my shoulder, saying, "Harper, what's wrong?" I finally came back to myself. Then, in a voice so calm it didn't even sound like mine, I said, "Dylan, my family isn't coming." I showed him the screen, my finger trembling. As he looked back and forth between the photo and the words, his expression shifted from shock to anger. His parents glanced at the screen too and were struck speechless. A heavy silence fell over the hall. One of the staff members hesitantly asked, "What would you like to do about the ceremony today?" At that moment, something inside me shattered with an audible crack. Tears no longer came. Instead, from deep within, a cold, steely resolve began to rise. I slowly stood up and removed my veil with my own hands. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, I declared clearly, "The ceremony will proceed." Looking around at Dylan's family and our astonished guests, I continued, "Everyone who came here today, you are my true, precious people. That's why the ceremony is for us. Let's make it the beginning of a new family." There was no lie or pretense in my words. In the emptiness of my heart, I felt a quiet but burning strength awaken. The ceremony that followed became one of the most beautiful memories of my life, enough to make me forget the absence of my family. Dylan's family treated me like their own daughter, and my dear friends surrounded me with warmth. It was truly a wonderful wedding. After the ceremony, I picked up my smartphone and opened the contacts list showing my mother and sister's names. No emotion surfaced. Just like moving unwanted files to the trash, I deleted both names completely. This was not revenge. This was the liberation of my soul. The resolve that had taken root in me at that wedding hall was not a fleeting burst of emotion. It was the culmination of countless sediments that had been sinking deep within my heart for years, finally taking form. My relationship with my family had begun to warp slowly but unmistakably around the time I started earning a stable income as an accountant. It all began 5 years ago with a single phone call from my mother, Vivian, crying on the other end. "Harper, please, I might lose my house." When I asked what happened, she said that ever since her divorce from my father, her excessive spending to keep up appearances had caught up with her. She had completely fallen behind on the mortgage payments. At that time, I had just managed to save enough money to finally start my own accounting firm, a goal I had worked toward for years. I couldn't simply give up on that dream so easily, but my mother knew how to melt my logic with emotional manipulation. "So, your dream is more important to you than your own mother. I guess you've already forgotten how much I sacrificed to raise you all by myself." Her sobs echoed through the phone. They were invisible blades, accusing me of being the coldest daughter in the world. I tried to resist, I tried to reason with her, but after days of emotional blackmail, her tears, her guilt-tripping words, her relentless pleading, my resolve began to erode little by little. "Just this once. I promise this will be the last time." That was what I told myself as I gave up on opening my own firm and decided to take over my mother's mortgage payments instead. When I handed her the money, she hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "I knew I could always count on you." But what I felt in that moment wasn't relief. It was despair, watching my dream crumble into pieces, and a deep, crushing exhaustion. It had all been a trap. The mask of reliable Harper was not something I had willingly put on. It was something forced upon me after I had fought and resisted until I had no strength left. My younger sister, Riley, 5 years my junior, cornered me in a different way. She was a terrorist of emotions, taking love as her hostage. Paying for her college tuition was still tolerable. The real problem came after graduation, when she said she wanted to become an independent nail artist and demanded a massive amount of startup funds. Thinking about the risks of failure, I offered her a different suggestion. "I think it's a wonderful dream. That's why you should start by creating a solid business plan. Submit it to a bank and try applying for a loan. I'll help you as a professional advisor." It was meant as sincere advice from a sister who wanted to see her grow independent. But Riley took my words as an insult to her dream. "What's that supposed to mean? Are you saying I'm going to fail?" "Of course you wouldn't understand my glamorous world, Miss Boring Accountant." She screamed, called our mother, and everything spiraled into disaster. Vivian immediately took Riley's side. "How could you be such a narrow-minded sister that you can't even believe in your own sister's dream?" she scolded. Then she pulled out her ultimate weapon. "Harper, don't tell me you've forgotten. Ever since your father abandoned us, I've worked myself to the bone to raise you two all alone. I gave up my youth, my dreams, everything for you, and now this mother is bowing her head and begging you to help your only sister chase her dream. Are you really going to trample on that?" It was the same weapon she had wielded for years, the emotional debt she made me carry ever since the day my father left. When I finally gave in and sent the money, Riley smiled in triumph and said, "Thanks, sis." That wasn't affection. It was control, manipulation disguised as love, taking advantage of my compassion and guilt. But her dream lasted no longer than her moods. She canceled client appointments without notice and badmouthed customers on social media whenever she felt like it. Naturally, her salon went under within a year. The hundreds of thousands I invested vanished into thin air. Yet she showed no remorse at all. She shrugged and said, as if she'd just lost someone else's money in a casual bet. Well, it was a good experience, I guess. But this failure really shook my confidence. I can't even think about starting my next fashion brand until I stabilize my life. Almost on cue, my mother chimed in. She's right, Harper. You can't let the fire of Riley's dream die here. You should support her monthly as a dream fund contribution so she can move on to her next step. And so began that humiliating system, $300 automatically leaving my account every month. The financial exploitation was only a visible symptom. The real disease ran deeper, the deep-rooted contempt they held toward me. To them, I wasn't an equal member of the family. I was a dull but convenient resource to sustain their glittering lifestyle. My worth wasn't measured by my character or my effort, but by the balance in my bank account. When I passed one of the toughest certification exams to become an accountant, they didn't celebrate. They couldn't even understand its value. Instead of praising my hard work, my mother brushed it aside, saying, "More importantly, isn't there someone special in your life? A woman's real happiness lies there." She dismissed my career with a laugh. Riley was even more blatant. Wow, that's impressive. So how much of a raise does that mean? Does that mean I can expect something nice for my birthday? To her, my intellectual achievements were nothing more than tools to fulfill her own material desires. The insult I suffered when I bought my first small apartment on my own is something I'll never forget. It was the crystallization of my effort and sweat, a symbol of my independence. But the first thing my mother said when she stepped inside was, "Oh, it's smaller than it looked in the pictures." Riley crossed her arms, looked around, and added, "For that price, couldn't you have found a better place?" Instead of celebrating my new home, they focused only on devaluing it. They didn't see my steady, disciplined life as admirable. To them, it was boring and beneath them. The betrayal on my wedding day was the culmination of the years of contempt they had held toward me. It was the grandest day of my life, the moment when the daughter they had always called dull and unremarkable would shine brighter than anyone, surrounded by love and celebration. By destroying that moment, they branded me one last time with their cruel message: "You don't deserve to be the heroine of a happy story." Since that day, I had been staying at Dylan's apartment, trying to rest both body and mind. Dylan and his parents accepted everything about my past and embraced me, saying, "From now on, we're your family." Each time I felt their warmth, I realized just how long I had been submerged in cold, lifeless water. All contact from my mother and Riley stopped completely. It was as if they had planned it together, a perfect silence. And yet, that very silence felt like the eerie calm before a storm. Then came the fateful Wednesday. Just as I had begun to sort through my thoughts and prepare myself for a new life, an email arrived. The sender was my mother, Vivian. The subject line read, "Urgent and wonderful news." A strange unease ran through me. Could it be an apology? With the faintest, most fragile hope, I opened the message, only to be met with words so shameless they defied belief. "Dear Harper, I am delighted to share that your sister Riley has become engaged to the gentleman she has been seeing. Next month, we will be hosting an elegant engagement party at a prestigious hotel with his family in attendance." After receiving the estimates for the venue, Riley's dress, catering, and so forth, we discovered we are about $2,500 short. This is an important investment in Riley's future and, by extension, in the future of our family as a whole. Naturally, as the family sponsor, I trust that you will cover this expense. I apologize for the short notice, but please make the transfer by the end of this week. By the time I finished reading, something inside me snapped, completely, permanently, and irrevocably. There was no anger left, no sorrow, only an endless void spreading through me. They had ruined my wedding, never once apologized, and now, without hesitation, came begging for money again. That simple fact sealed my final decision. I stared at the email as if examining a rare insect, stripping myself of emotion entirely. Every word radiated their self-centered logic, not even malice, just pure, unfiltered selfishness. I realized then that there was no point in trying to communicate with them in human language anymore. Write an angry reply? Call and yell? I refused to waste another ounce of my energy that way. There was only one language they could ever understand. The one they loved most, the one they had always demanded from me: money. Only the cold, silent statement of financial truth could reach them now. I opened the reply window. My hands were unnervingly steady. My mind was clear, calm, the same focused clarity I felt when performing a complex financial audit. And after a few seconds of quiet thought, I typed just one word: congratulations. The sound of the enter key echoed through the still room. In that single word, I poured all of my emotions and my final goodbye. Let us celebrate the beginning of your new life. However, I would never again step onto that stage. Not a single cent of the money I had earned through tears and sweat would be spent on their celebration. It was a farewell letter disguised as a message of congratulations, the coldest kind of severance. Right after sending the email, I deleted my mother's and sister's contact information from my phone without a trace of hesitation and blocked their numbers. I searched for their accounts across every social media platform and blocked them all completely. I erased their presence from my digital world and from my life. It was like cutting out a tumor that had been eating away at my body for years without anesthesia. Painful, yes, but sacred, a ritual of rebirth. And yet, cutting digital ties wasn't enough to ensure true safety. They still had spare keys to my apartment. At any moment, they could open the door under the sacred excuse of "we're family" and invade my sanctuary. The very thought made my spine shiver. To reclaim my true sanctuary, I needed to rebuild a physical barrier. That very day, I went straight to the property management office and formally requested a lock replacement. The next afternoon, a locksmith arrived. When the work was done, he handed me 3 brand new keys, sealed in a clear plastic bag. These will completely disable the old ones. His words sounded like a declaration of independence, solemn yet liberating. I bowed deeply and accepted the keys with trembling hands. Back in my apartment, I inserted the new key into the door and slowly turned it. Click. A crisp, metallic sound. It wasn't just the sound of a lock engaging. It was the sound of sealing off an unwelcome past and securing the safety of my future. No longer would I have to fear my mother's hysterical visits. No longer would Riley barge in uninvited and rummage through my belongings. This single door had become the absolute boundary that would protect me. I leaned my back against it and slowly slid down to the floor. Then, for the first time since my wedding day, I cried aloud. They were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of joy, the joy of finally reclaiming a life that had not belonged to me for far too long. When my tears had dried, I opened my laptop to take care of one final task. The physical wall was now secure, but the thickest, most invisible chain still bound us, the chain of money. The pipeline I had kept alive for years, numbing myself with doses of duty and guilt, faithfully sending money every month. I logged into my main bank's website and opened the page for automatic transfers. There they were, coldly displayed on the screen. To mother, purpose. Loan amount $1,500 per month. To sister, purpose. Dream support fund, amount $300 per month. A total of $1,800, $21,600 a year. The size of the amount made me dizzy. With that money, I could have expanded my office. I could have taken that long-abandoned trip to Italy, not once, but several times. I could have furnished a more beautiful home for my new life with Dylan. I had been sacrificing my future possibilities with my own hands, bound by the ghosts of the past. For a brief moment, only a heartbeat, a thought crossed my mind. If I stopped these transfers, how would my mother and sister survive? But that faint trace of guilt was instantly burned away by the memory of standing alone in the wedding hall, drowning in despair. They were adults. They should take responsibility for their own lives. I moved the cursor to the stop button beside my mother's name. Click. A cold confirmation window appeared on the screen. This action cannot be undone. Are you sure you want to stop this transfer? With more conviction than I had ever felt preparing any financial report, I clicked yes. Then I did the same for Riley's transfer. When I saw the list of recipients drop to 0, I felt an incredible lightness, as if the heavy wings that had been weighing on my back were suddenly torn away. At last, I could fly for myself, not for anyone else. A few days passed after I had severed every financial tie. On a quiet Saturday morning, Dylan and I were having a late breakfast when the harsh sound of the intercom buzzer echoed through the apartment. I looked at the monitor, and as I expected, there stood my mother, Vivian, her face twisted in fury, with Riley beside her, arms folded in irritation. Judging by their expressions, they had realized their keys no longer worked. I glanced at Dylan and whispered, "It's okay," before turning my attention back to the monitor. I didn't touch the answer button. I simply watched in silence. Frustrated by the lack of response, my mother began pressing the call button over and over like a woman possessed. Her persistence no longer frightened me. It almost made me pity her. Eventually, they disappeared from the screen, but the silence didn't last long. Moments later, the front door shook violently under a barrage of pounding. Thud, 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 making the walls tremble. "Harper, I know you're in there. What is the meaning of this?" "Come on, sis, are you serious? You can't just stop sending money like that." The shouting that reached me through the door no longer sounded like a family argument. It was the ugly clash of creditor and debtor, a perfect embodiment of the saying, "When money stops, so does the bond." I took a sip of my freshly brewed coffee and sank deeply into the sofa. Dylan sat beside me, his arm wrapping gently around my shoulders. That warmth only made me calmer. The old me would have panicked about appearances, rushing to open the door in embarrassment. But not anymore. This was my castle. And the people pounding at my gate were no longer family. They were invaders, threats to my peace. I simply waited in silence, safe within my fortress walls, until the invaders exhausted themselves and retreated after displaying their disgraceful desperation. When they realized that primitive tactics, pounding on doors and hurling insults, no longer worked on me, a new sound filled the air. Sirens, growing louder. They had finally played their last and most foolish card, calling the police. "I knew it," I murmured softly, reaching for the clear file folder I had carefully prepared for this very moment. Inside were undeniable records, the unshakable evidence of this absurd, tragic farce. Soon the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw 2 uniformed officers standing outside, looking slightly uneasy. Behind them, my mother, Vivian, played the part of a tragic heroine, tears streaming down her face as she cried, "My daughter, she's stolen all of our keepsakes and essential belongings, and now she's locked herself inside." Not to be outdone, Riley joined in with dramatic precision. "My sister is mentally unstable. She's been threatening us. Please, you have to protect us," she shouted, her voice trembling in perfect imitation of fear. I took a slow, steady breath and quietly opened the door. "Good afternoon. My name is Harper Collins," I said calmly. The officers seemed slightly taken aback by my composure. "Please come in. I'm happy to explain everything." I led them into the living room and spread the contents of the clear file across the table. Photos of the empty seats at my wedding ceremony, screenshots of their social media posts, complete with clear timestamps matching the event, and printed bank statements documenting 5 years' worth of substantial transfers to both of them. "I understand the report you received mentioned theft and threats," I said evenly. "But these are the objective facts." As I spoke, I could see my mother and sister's faces drain of color in the corner of the room. The older of the two officers examined the documents carefully, his expression turning grave as he flipped through each page. Meanwhile, the younger officer turned to my mother and sister with routine questions. "What exactly are these keepsakes you claim were stolen?" he asked. My mother hesitated, her lips trembling. "And what kind of threats did she make?" he pressed. Riley stammered, unable to form a coherent answer. Their lies were stripped bare, unraveling rapidly under the light of truth. The older officer finally looked up from the documents and spoke in a grave tone. "Ma'am, what you've told us is very different from the evidence presented here." He glanced briefly at me, then turned back to my mother and sister, his voice firm and authoritative. "This is not a theft case. On the contrary, it appears to be a long-standing pattern of financial and emotional dependency on your daughter. She has every legal right to change her locks and to stop providing financial support. If you continue to make false reports or disturb her peace, we will have no choice but to take appropriate legal action." His words carried the weight of a verdict, absolute and final. My mother collapsed weakly, whispering, "That can't be." Riley stood frozen, her face flushed red, unable to lift her head. The rules of society, the very boundaries they had ignored for so long, now loomed before them as an unscalable wall. At the officer's calm instruction, "That will be all for today. Please leave," they shuffled away without once looking back. I closed the door quietly behind them and turned the lock. Click. The sound rang out like a declaration of victory. A week passed since that stormy Saturday. Dylan's parents, along with a few close friends who had stood by me even after learning my story, and kind neighbors and co-workers who had been worried about me, all gathered at my home. The table was filled with homemade dishes everyone had brought to share. The warmth in that room was incomparable to the hollow emptiness of my wedding day. When Dylan's father gave a small, shy smile and said, "Harper, you are a daughter the heavens have blessed us with," I couldn't hold back my tears. But they were not tears of sorrow or regret. They were tears of gratitude. For the first time in my life, I was receiving unconditional love. My friends smiled and cried as if it were their own happiness, saying, "You did it. From now on, you only need to be happy." And I couldn't help but wonder, what did blood ties ever truly mean? The people who had tried to hurt, use, and control me. And the people, unrelated by blood, who understood my pain, who truly wished for my happiness, and who rushed to be by my side. The answer was already clear. Family is not defined by the circumstances of one's birth. It is a community built through shared time, mutual respect, and the effort to nurture love. The warm smiles surrounding me now, they were the true form of family, the one worth protecting with all my heart. A few months later, a relative, looking somewhat uneasy, told me what had become of my former family. Riley's engagement had been broken off. The cause, unsurprisingly, was that foolish uproar the day my mother and sister called the police to my apartment. Her fiancé's family came from old money, a household that valued reputation and decorum above wealth itself. Word of that scandal somehow reached their ears. A family that storms into a sister's home over money and involves the police with false accusations, such conduct is intolerable. Her fiancé's father had reportedly said this quietly but firmly. "Regardless of your own character, the incident involving your family is something we cannot overlook. Becoming relatives with such people would stain our family's honor." The engagement was canceled immediately. Riley's dream of marrying into wealth had shattered under the weight of her own family's disgrace. Now she was said to be in hysterics, blaming both my mother and me for her downfall. As for my mother, Vivian, she had fallen behind on her mortgage payments and lost the house that once symbolized her pride and vanity. Without the glue of money, the family had crumbled into a heap of rubble, each blaming the other for the ruin. When I heard all this, I didn't feel triumphant. Only a quiet sense of pity filled my heart. Today, Dylan and I sit together on the balcony of our new apartment, bathed in the gentle afternoon light. I still work as an accountant, but I've found new goals. One is to finally fulfill the dream I once gave up, to travel to Italy. The other is to start sharing my story through a blog and social media to reach others who, like me, have suffered at the hands of family. My past was not meaningless. Because I walked through that dark tunnel, I now know the true brilliance of light. My happiness will never again be dictated by anyone else. From now on, I will carve my life for myself and myself alone.